One shoulder-fired missile fundamentally altered the trajectory of the Cold War. The US spent hundreds of millions on a shadow war that left a lasting, messy impact on today's global politics. The CIA's costliest covert operation aimed to defeat a superpower, yet it built a resistance movement that later targeted the very agency that funded it. To grasp why the Middle East and Central Asia are so unstable today, look back at the geopolitical shifts of the late 1970s. The Soviet Union targeted Afghanistan to grow its regional influence and military reach. The Soviet military invaded Afghanistan in 1979, backing the communist-led Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. This wasn't merely a local fight, it directly threatened the existing global balance of power, destabilizing international relations. The United States used this opportunity to implement containment, directly countering Soviet influence through a new, aggressive geopolitical strategy. The plan aimed to make the Soviet occupation as expensive and bloody as possible. This era started a controversial chapter in American intelligence history, defined by high-stakes covert operations. The CIA started a program to bypass diplomacy and act directly on the battlefield. Decades of consistent, large-scale funding built a resilient insurgency that eventually outlasted the Soviet Union itself. The CIA called this massive covert undertaking Operation Cyclone. Between 1979 and 1992, the CIA ran this program, arming and funding Afghan Mujahideen. The US aimed to arm the resistance against Soviet occupation and the Soviet-backed Afghan government. This strategic effort focused on supplying weapons to various Mujahideen factions. This covert mission was massive in scale. It wasn't only an American project. Britain's MI6 ran its own separate parallel operations to provide critical support to the fighters. Moving the gear required crossing several borders and coordinating with various intelligence agencies. In the early days, the financial commitment was relatively small. In mid-1979, the initial funding for the program began at just $95,000 used. By 1980, annual funding for the operation reached roughly $25 million. Things escalated rapidly. By 1987, the CIA sent $600 million annually to the Afghan resistance to bolster their fight. This huge cash influx made the Afghan insurgency one of the most well-funded movements on the planet. This massive spending was a political move. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski used the Soviet invasion to his advantage. He planned the conflict to execute a Soviet bleed strategy, aiming to drain the superpower's resources through prolonged attrition. The strategy aimed to trap the Soviet Union in a costly, long proxy war to drain their resources and manpower. But distributing the money caused real problems. The program specifically targeted certain resistance groups rather than supporting everyone. The CIA provided massive funding and weapons to militant Islamic groups. They backed various jihadist groups that Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq's Pakistani regime already supported through existing covert channels. This choice embedded radical ideology directly into the resistance's core structure. As the war continued, weapons supplied to the Mujahideen grew significantly more lethal. The US deployed the FIM-92 Stinger missile during combat operations in 1981. One soldier used it to shoot down advanced Soviet planes from the ground. The impact of these missiles on Soviet air superiority was devastating. Stinger missiles likely caused more than half of the 4 He-51 Soviet aircraft lost during the war, proving to be a decisive factor in the conflict. The losses were massive. Records show at least 333 helicopters and 11 Soviet jets were destroyed during the Soviet-Afghan War. This significant destruction of air assets highlighted the intense difficulty of maintaining air superiority. Losing these advanced machines stripped the Soviet military of its power to control Afghan skies. This take advantage pressured the Soviet Union to withdraw during 1989. Radical groups quickly moved in to occupy the power vacuum left by the retreating Soviet forces. Proxy warfare during these years established the foundation for the Taliban's eventual rise to power. During the early 1990s, Pakistan helped drive the rise of this specific new movement. Islamabad backed the Taliban to gain strategic depth during its ongoing long-standing rivalry with India. This policy aimed to secure influence across the region. The Taliban moved beyond local insurgencies to function as a regional political tool. For decades, Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban moved from active sponsorship into periods of intense, violent conflict. These shifting alliances have real consequences today. Years ago, intelligence agencies even ran joint operations to try and dismantle the Taliban's leadership, launching coordinated strikes against their high-ranking commanders. The CIA and Pakistan's ISI ran a secret, high-stakes Karachi operation to arrest Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, a top leader in the Taliban's Quetta Shura. This targeted mission aimed to disrupt the insurgency's command structure. The Taliban survived these decapitation strikes. They routinely replaced senior leaders within days of an assassination or strike. Look at Mullah Obaidullah Akhund, the former Taliban defense minister. Pakistani security forces captured him in March 2007, yet despite this high-profile arrest, he remained active in the insurgency. He returned to lead insurgent attacks against us and allied troops. This cycle of violence and replacement persisted until the major shift in recent history. The Afghan government collapsed in 2021 after the United States withdrew its troops from Afghanistan. The Taliban quickly took over the entire country, rapidly seizing control of major urban centers and provincial capitals. Afghanistan is currently unstable. Even the Taliban leadership is struggling under intense, growing internal pressure right now. During a leaked January 2005 speech, Hibatullah Akhundzada warned that growing internal splits might eventually collapse the emirate. This sudden warning highlights deep-seated tensions within the leadership. This some equations. He feared government insiders were actively undermining his regime's stability, creating a deep-seated sense of paranoia within his administration. This instability grows because relations with their former patron, Pakistan, have completely broken down. Islamabad and the Afghan Taliban are now in an outright violent confrontation. Direct military action broke out in March 2026. Operation Cyclone shows exactly how proxy wars create massive, unmanageable debts for everyone involved. The US hit its target, the Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan, and the Cold War started to end. That decisive victory empowered radical groups, which later began launching direct, coordinated attacks against Western interests across the entire globe. By funding the most ideologically driven fighters, the CIA helped create a blueprint for modern jihadism. Arms and cash flooded a region already on the brink of total political collapse. As Moscow's Soviet bleed strategy succeeded, yet it permanently damaged Afghanistan's social and political structures, leaving lasting, deep-seated damage. These decisions still shape every modern conflict in the region. The US went from actively funding the Mujahideen to later fighting the Taliban, creating one of the most jarring policy reversals in recent geopolitical history. The relationship with Pakistan, once a cornerstone of anti-Soviet efforts, has collapsed into a state of near war, leaving the regional security landscape deeply unstable. Missiles, funding, and intelligence networks usually remain active even after a specific military mission ends. They just find new hands and new purposes. Looking at the Afghan-Pakistani border today, the 1979 conflict's consequences still drive current violence and instability across the entire region. Today's instability isn't accidental. It happened because leaders chose quick wins and immediate profits instead of building a foundation for lasting stability. Operation Cyclone was one of the longest and most expensive covert actions ever undertaken by the CIA. If you enjoyed this look at Operation Cyclone, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. We examined the history of Operation Cyclone, the CIA program that armed the Afghan Mujahideen from 1979 to 1992. How will the Shia's history in Afghanistan affect the region long-term? Write your take on this in the comments below. Next, we examine how Pakistan, once the Afghan Taliban's closest friend, has moved from sponsor to enemy following recent airstrikes.